Now, you're working out of where?
So these days I'm working out of Paris, but I used to be in Shenzhen in China for 4 years before that, and over a decade in mainland China and Asia at large. Yeah.
Could you introduce the two accelerators, SOSV and HAX?
Yeah, so I think if you work in the hardware field, you've probably heard of HAX, but not many people know the fund behind it called SOSV. So SOSV is a fund that started as a family office and then basically took a bet thinking that some sectors would develop, some sectors with deep tech would develop over a really long time frame and be really impactful. And the first sector they decided to focus on was hardware. So we started HAX 6 years ago as an accelerator, and then it turned into a seed fund focused on hardware. We have another branch focused on life sciences called Indie Bio, and with another branch in Europe called Rebel Bio that do basically cellular agriculture, gene therapy, and other life science related things. One of the companies out of it, maybe you heard of, is called Memphis Meats. They do meat without cows, and we have a bunch of other companies doing like milk, egg whites, collagen, and a bunch of other things. So in hardware, so far with HAX, we invested in about 200 companies. So that's quite a lot in the category.
More speakers than we have.
Yeah, it's a lot. In the fund at large, we have about 800 companies in portfolio. So SOSV is probably one of the most active early stage funds you never heard of.
Okay. So hardware could be everything from toaster to a telephone. What are the segments HAX has invested in and is interested in?
So that's a really good question. When we started, it was really right during the kind of maker movement boom. The maker movement.
The maker movement.
And at that time, there was a lot of momentum around consumer tech. So 5-6 years ago, that was probably about 80-90% of what we're doing. But now, it's the opposite. We do about 10% consumer, and 90% is enterprise, industry, and health tech.
And what is like the most exciting hardware you have in the portfolio at the moment? Did you see Lumen yesterday, where you can blow with one breath? It tells you what you ate and how you lose weight, and it's hardware I was amazed by.
We have one company just like that. I'm not sure which one presented yesterday.
Lumen.
Maybe Lumen. Okay, that's a different company. But yeah, there's so much new things. I don't know where to start, but just to give you some ideas about the companies I'm more excited about. So we've done a lot of investment in service robotics. So those are robots that are generally not humanoid, and not the crazy stuff that Boston Dynamics does, that does great YouTube videos, but commercially doesn't work so well. It's more like very pragmatic, practical robots that do one task really well. One company, for instance, is called AvidBots, based in Canada. They do cleaning robots for commercial spaces, such as airports, schools. They already have about 100 people. Their robots are deployed in airports in Singapore, in Osaka, in Paris, and it just cleans things very efficiently. We have other things that are also doing kind of boring tasks, like one is called Simbi Robotics by former guys from Willow Garage, a kind of legendary robotics company in the Valley.
So robotics is a major part of your business.
Yeah, but if you think of robotics, it's really about, it's not so much about the robot, it's about what is the industrial or commercial problem you're solving. And the robot's just a way to do it. Because when you want to interact with the physical world, be it in a commercial environment, industrial environment, or with the human body, you need sensors, you need something to measure or to act on the physical world, which is why hardware is so important.
And is Amazon the reason why you are now more interested in the non-consumer hardware segment?
Not really, because, I mean, of course, some of those big companies, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Facebook, they're doing really interesting stuff, but they're targeting always really, really mass market things that has to be used by most people. Turns out that first, they almost do no B2B. So B2B has enormous opportunities. The challenges with B2C is that typically consumers, anytime you ask somebody to spend more than $100 or £100, they hesitate. But if you ask a business to spend $10,000, they don't really care as long as they can make money or save money So the price is much less important.
I guess
What's
the
important is
difference
the ROI, whereas consumers
one
don't
is an
calculate that.
investment for B2B, and the other
Absolutely.
one is a kind of consumption.
Like, what exactly do you need as a consumer? Everything's kind of nice to have. You don't really have must-have. If it's a must-have, something maybe for your health, for the education of your kids or something, but everything else is accessory.
And talk a little bit, I remember when we met in 2010
Yeah,
at the
that's
second
right.
NOAH conference, you were one of the smartest people there knowing about the big ecosystems, and now you traveled the world. You have started in Asia, you came back to Europe, you've spent a lot of time in the US. Where do investors, or where you find like your next exciting hardware company? Is there like a difference from continent to continent?
Yes, it's a really good question. So today our portfolio is about half North America, a quarter Europe, a quarter Asia. It just happens to be this way. We don't really segregate in any way. Like, we look for the best companies everywhere. But what we've seen is that when you develop a company, there's like some key resources you have to have access to. So for instance, there's the basic research. There's where do you prototype, where do you do production, where do you find funding, and where do you find your customers. And those 5 functions can be done in different places. You could have your R&D in the UK, in France, or wherever. You could have prototyping done in Shenzhen, production done there too, and then the customers or investors could be anywhere. So our model, and that's why we opened our first office in Shenzhen 6 years ago, and then a San Francisco office, is to provide a lot of support to enable startups to actually leverage those resources. Just to give you an idea in the hardware, even in Toulouse, where there's a big cluster for aeronautics, if you want to do like circuit boards on like prototyping electronics, it takes you 2 weeks to get a circuit board shipped. In Shenzhen, you get it the same day, and it's much cheaper. So the speed is really what you get out of China in that sector. So now to go more specifically about differences in geographies, in terms of basic research, I think actually Europe is doing really well. US is doing really well. China a little bit less, but Chinese entrepreneurs are very, very good at creating systems, and they're very fast. And they also have very good access to capital, because investors in China, they're very aggressive in terms of getting into deals, and they're not afraid of hardware, because our hardware is all around them. They have all the factories, so it's not, it's a kind of known quantity. So the challenge I see in Europe in particular is kind of different functions. First is, how do you go from the lab to a good prototype, and how do you go from prototype to market? And one of the problems is accessing capital, but also accessing customers. And I find that generally entrepreneurs in Europe are less able to actually promote their business and basically find access to both capital and customers.
Are you also helping startups to find investors maybe on the manufacturing side? Are there Chinese factories interested to back, in order to win a client, provide capital?
That's a really good question. Actually, in a way, you're right that the ecosystem is so competitive in the supply chain. The factories are competing with each other like crazy. That's why they're happy or interested to work with startups, because at the beginning, startups is no business, right? They have no money, they have no volume, so it's a bet. But typically, factories don't invest cash. They more like invest resources, and they accept to work with you. Because, yeah, if you have tons of money, you go to Foxconn, they have 1 million people, they have robots all over the place, fine. If you have less than that, well, maybe you go to Flex, Tier 2, 500,000 people, but they won't give you the best project manager, for sure. So you go to Tier 3, Tier 4, you need to find basically factory owners who want to bet on you,
yes,
and are interested, and they really think like investors, even if they don't put on cash. But even when the way you even negotiate terms with the factory,
they can provide contribution of manufacturing.
Exactly. So they can provide access to resources. They can provide you with better terms. If they allow you to pay them like 3 months after shipping or 6 months after shipping, which would be crazy, but that's almost like a bank loan.
Yes.
So they actually
that's by
really
the way
important.
how Amazon made it. In 2001, there was the only reason Amazon didn't go bust is because they paid the publisher once a year. While we pay for the books and the CDs back then with a credit card immediately.
Yeah, so the cash flow issue is really
500 million
really
financing by the publisher.
Another important aspect of factories is that actually as a startup, you actually learn how to make things from them, which is why it's so important to spend time with them.
And that's why you, as Hux, has a competitive advantage by being close to the manufacturers.
That's right.
Well, Benjamin, thank you so much. I'm glad you came back to NOAH.
Pleasure.
Good luck.
Glad to
Find
see your
us the
platform
next
grew so much.
iPhone.